We'll be touching on some of the challenges of getting a board in an organisation to buy into the value of cybersecurity and a good cybersecurity posture.
I mean, nobody wants to be in a security job, really. They are thankless. They are the first person who's going to get hold over their calls if anything goes wrong.
So you had those situations where it was clearly the right thing to do, it's a business imperative, but people are still being reluctant or even against. How have you managed to overcome that?
In those situations where I knew it would be a challenge, I used to seek out those cheerleaders that I knew could support me and use that as part of the campaign to get them to sell that story with me.
Your peers sometimes don't have that desire to change, obviously without, I guess, bringing skeletons out of the closet per se. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Being able to clearly articulate the business requirement and the return on investment. And sometimes that return on investment isn't about it costs X, you're going to realize Y. That return of investment is it will cost X, but it will allow 50% of the workforce to be more productive.
Hi, welcome to ThreatCast. This is a podcast by Threatscape. It's the show where we discuss everything cyber. My name is Paul O'Sullivan. I'm the UK Sales Director. And in today's episode, we'll be touching on some of the challenges of getting a board in an organisation to buy into the value of cybersecurity and a good cybersecurity posture. I'm joined by Mark Parr, and we'll be discussing the ins and outs of that very thing, getting the board bought into cyber. So without further ado, welcome, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, Paul. Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me along.
Great stuff. And I suppose to kick things off then, if you just perhaps like to give an introduction for the audience, who you are, what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Parr. I'm the head of technology for a mid-sized accountancy firm based in London, but with a responsibility globally to provide accounting services. Been in role just about to hit my 6 months. So this is a fairly new role for Buzzacott. This is the first time that they brought an individual in to sit in the partnership to really drive technology across, not just internally, not just that sort of BAU infrastructure plumbing type stuff, but also how do we think about technology as a service offering to our clients?
Right. And I guess the immediate question on the back of that then is, so how did you find yourself in the world of IT? What's the journey? If you'd like to walk us through a little bit of that, please.
Yeah, not by design, Paul, would be my answer. But started bizarrely as a 15-year-old boy wanted to join the army. And my father, who had served in the army himself, said to me, get a trade. And not really knowing what that meant. The recruiting sergeant at the Newport Careers Office in South Wales said to me, well, you can join the Royal Signals and do an apprenticeship. And that was the start of my technology journey. And I didn't know it back then. It was analog technology, really. I learned Morse code, I learned battlefield communications. But actually, what I also learned and recognize that I learned now when I look back at the sort of the principles of modern digital communications, packet switching, data networks, all that sort of good stuff. And they taught me all of that as part of my trade, as well as the opportunity to be a soldier. So running around in fields and doing that sort of stuff that I enjoyed. But that led me through some really pivotal moments for defense, digitizing the battlefield, taking Bowman radio network into Iraq in 2006, first time we deployed a digital network into a conflict zone, writing cyber policies for defense in 2010, and various sort of landmarks throughout my career, so that when I left the army in 2016, migrated into the corporate world, joined KPMG to sell cybersecurity services to clients, and then very quickly recognized that there was an opportunity to add extra value there by using my security clearances and my sort of knowledge of working in government and defense to support KPMG, and then eventually becoming their head of information assurance. So they're sort of the precursor to their CISO in 2018. And then I've been on this sort of technology leadership journey ever since. I moved from KPMG to a global law firm, HF, and again, charged globally to drive forward their technology offering. And I did that until last year, and then joined Buzzacott in November of 23 to help them really drive and change the view of technology as a key enabler and a key facilitator to delivering accountancy services. So, as I say, not by design, all pure luck, but I've found actually I really like technology, and it's a great space to work in.
Yeah, and it's interesting that journey from signals into IT. I see that a lot. There's a lot of guys I've encountered during my career that come from that signal background. I think it lends itself really well. Arguably so does being in the forces. I think there are lots of disciplines and lots of those soft skills that we perhaps don't truly appreciate that transfer really, really well.
Yeah, I agree. I'm biased, I know, but I think one of the things that they're really good at, Paul, is leadership around technology and leadership around cyber. Because sometimes you will know this. You find that senior roles in technology perhaps are too technical. And I think part of this conversation is how do I ensure that the technical aspects of my role are briefed to the board in a manner that they understand it. And so being able to work, I can be deeply technical, although I'm not as deeply technical as I used to be, but I can be, so that my technicians will feel that they're getting their point across. But equally being able to speak to the board in a language that they recognize, to sort of deciphering those two worlds, if you like.
Yeah, because you probably saw yourself, there was a potentially interesting debate on LinkedIn just recently about should a CISO be technical or be business? Does it matter that a CISO doesn't have technical skills? And there's a debate both sides, as you can imagine. But I think that's an absolutely valid point, that having the technical knowledge certainly is important, but that translating that language to the board in a way that they will understand and therefore be able to make a decision, the right decision or the best decision. Yeah. I think that's a skill that's really needed.
I think you're absolutely right. I think also that bit, you've sort of alluded to it there, it's being able to understand the business. It's something I've really focused on in the last few years, is ensuring that I really understand the mechanics of the organization and what they're trying to deliver. So that's where you can offer best value. Because there used to be a time, didn't there, where the CISO or the head of cyber would just say no, and people would walk away and go, that's great, okay, no. But actually, that's not good enough anymore. So we have to be more around enabling, but doing it, taking that pragmatic approach to the problem and being able to overlay a bit of risk management, understand the needs of the business and the needs of the client versus the sort of wants and desires of security. So I think that's really important now, is being able to decipher what the business does as well as being able to understand the technology and brief it.
Yeah, quite. And another point you made there, I'll chat about this with somebody yesterday, that knowledge of the business and understanding how to translate that into what they might need technically or from a cybersecurity perspective and vice versa. I think when people are recruiting or when people make decisions or people leave, that loss of IP and regaining that has a real potential impact, I think, in terms of people going on that journey, that transformation journey, wherever it may be. There's a massive value in that IP contained within people's heads that's often overlooked, I think.
Yeah, no, you know what? Conversation I had not 2 hours ago around service catalog and recognizing, having had 2 briefings from different organizations on tools, that they do exactly the same thing. So therefore, who in the business is tying in those points? You're joining the dots. And I see more and more my job being exactly that. I'm a connector of dots and an understanding of the business, and less about, right, what's the latest technology we're going to buy and deploy. So I think that IP bit, how do you articulate that? And we've had this conversation before about how much stuff is actually in your head that would be useful to share elsewhere, or even for you to come back to, because actually in my index up here somewhere, there's some stuff that's useful. How do I drag it out and articulate that and share it beyond, myself or my team or whatever? So I think that's, I don't know how to fix that at the moment. That's part of the challenge. So where I am now, the leadership team, we're all fairly new, apart from one individual, and that individual has been lent on a lot to try and draw out his knowledge to share wider. And that must be challenging for him, because he would be wanting to share it. Of course, he'd be wanting us all to do well, but equally needs to do his day job. So how do you ensure that gets shared in a way that's equitable?
God, internet's around for years and years and years, but nobody's cracked that nut yet. They've it's like a conversation around personal knowledge management as well. It's like I'm still wrestling that little challenge as are you, and we chatted about that previously. But imagine that times 1,000 or 5,000 or more individuals. Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. The one good thing where I am now with Buzzacott is what we find is a lot of people there have been there from the start of their careers. It feels unique. You certainly nowhere that I've been before in such the same way, but we have people in the partnership who joined as trainees that have stayed throughout and are now in the partnership. It's a wonderful thing. What that does give you is some great depth of corporate knowledge. So there will be people, and I think of the chair of our risk committee, Katie White. She is superb for just knowing stuff that you wouldn't imagine she would know. And so it's quite refreshing to see that. It's a warts and all of you sometimes, but you need that.
Yeah. I suppose the counterpoint to that is that on the one hand, you've got all that baked-in knowledge and that ingrained knowledge, but then potentially with that comes a reluctance to change, which we can all be guilty of. So here you are trying to drive that change with ideas and technologies, and but we've always done it this way. And you kind of
yeah. There's definitely something around the culture of an organization to change. I think what Buzzacott have recognized, and I don't know when this happened, before me joining perhaps, or certainly that allowed me to join, is the culture of the organization is we want to grow and be better and deliver more. Therefore, we recognize we have to change. And it's really interesting because actually compared to previous roles, this and the reason for taking this opportunity on when I met the leadership team at Buzzacott is they absolutely recognize that they need to evolve. And so bringing me in is a step change that they recognize I'm going to be part of the catalyst for that change. And so I'm really, and look, and I'm in credit right now. So let's have this conversation in 18 months and see if they still feel the same. But certainly right now, there's definitely an appreciation that I'm coming in to shape the tree and to make some changes and to drive them forward. And I'm getting full support for that, which is really incredible. I feel very fortunate actually, because I know speaking to peers around and in different sectors, that isn't always the case, and it's challenging if you feel like you're fighting the rut.
Right, so we'll come back to that in a second, but I guess just for a bit of comedy, we're on the 25th of April 2024, so the time capsule that will be this podcast, should we come back to 6 months?
Exactly right.
Yeah, that will work out.
Exactly right. Yeah, hold my feet to the fire, make sure my work. I agree.
Yeah, well, you didn't push B to maximum VHS one, so we're on to a winner there, right? So, and you just back to what I said. We'll come back to it. You hinted at your peers sometimes don't have that look of that desire to change, and you've alluded also to in previous times, obviously without, I guess, bringing skeletons out of closet per se. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because that's one of the things I'd like to try and get from this when speaking with yourself and others for that matter going forward to where you've had that less an environment where they're less open to change and transition, because that's where the real challenge is, right?
Yeah, and it stems down to, for me, it stems down to the remit upon which you've been brought in to do the role. And so if I take where I am now, the recognition is they needed a change. They didn't know how to do it with the skills they had internally. So bring in somebody who could help facilitate and drive that change. So I don't ever go to the board. I sit on the board, thankfully, so I'm one of the executive board members. I don't ever go there to get approval for the idea. I go there to get endorsement for the investment. And that's born out of this wonderful position that is the board recognizing they've got to invest in me and what I want to do. And so it's not, there's a very clear recognition that this is not my idea for the sake of my idea. This is the right thing to do to drive the business forward. So being able to clearly articulate the business requirement and the return on investment for that change we are going to make. And sometimes that return on investment isn't about it costs X, you're going to realize Y. That return of investment is it will cost X, but it will allow 50% of the workforce to be more productive. And so I'm in a really fortunate position. I've been in roles before where I've gone to the board and almost had to seek approval to move initiatives forward, even though those initiatives were absolutely imperative to the success of the firm. And I think back to attending meetings at risk committee meetings where you articulate a risk and you articulate a solution to that risk, and there being a discussion around why you need to spend that money to do that piece of work. And it's almost, you also get to the point where you think, I'm not doing this for my benefit. I don't recommend this because it's what I want. I'm recommending it because it's necessary for the business and for the future of the organization. So it's really, I wouldn't have taken this role had I met the leadership team and felt that they weren't supportive of the initiative I was going to drive forward. Because I think as I progress in my career, as I progress in age, I'm less inclined to want to be combative in every executive meeting I go to. I want to know that I'm going in there with the best intention and that I've got that support. And that's a lot about just the culture of the organization and that recognition by leadership of the requirement to change.
I suppose there's two things there. One is to the audience, maybe choose wisely going forward based on the experience you've had, and back to the previous ones. How did you overcome some of those then? So you had those situations where it was clearly the right thing to do. It's a business imperative. It's the way to take them forward. There is benefit, but people are still being reluctant or even against. How have you managed to overcome that?
Yeah, so I think in those instances, and how much I relied upon sort of cheerleaders in amongst that stakeholder group that could support me, that could help that storytelling.
Okay.
And it's a story. Sometimes it is about storytelling. I never ever wanted to be the boy who cried wolf, so it was never about that, but it was certainly about why the requirement was essential. And always having in my mind this concept of the delivery of secure, reliable, integrated technology solutions helped build the trust agenda with your clients. If your clients know you're going to secure their data, if they know that you are working as efficiently as you can, it will breed that trust. And I use this word a lot with my team around that's what we're doing. That's what our role is to build trust, both internally and externally. So in those situations where I knew it would be a challenge, I used to seek out those cheerleaders that I knew that could support me, and almost sort of use that as part of the campaign to get them to sell that story with me. And that's challenging because that means you almost spend 3 or 4 times the effort in telling that story to bring the right people along. But sometimes that's necessary. And again, it points back to what I think this job is, this sort of senior leadership roles, Paul, is I'm not on the tools anymore. You certainly don't want me sat writing SQL databases or tinkering with a firewall, right? You certainly don't want that anymore. I'm happy to change a keyboard if the service desk need me to, but that's about it. My role really is about communicating and storytelling into the business and being seen as that trusted advisor that's going to give you good advice, but actually that talks sense, understands the business and talks sense.
I think that 2 interesting points that I'm taking from that is the understanding the business is key. I do think a lot of senior IT leaders and CISOs for that matter do, but it's the cheerleaders comment you made. I think that's quite a useful point, that identifying those cheerleaders as well as champions sounds to me that's key in those difficult scenarios.
Yeah. So having a very clear sort of view of your stakeholder map. When I was a consultant, we used to do stakeholder mapping. I'm sure you do it in your sales team, right? You'll be thinking about stakeholder maps, and you get a real sense. It's important in whatever you do. I still do it now, and I do it with my team. I do it, when I think about the risk of the business and who do I need to make sure is coming on this journey with us. For instance, we will do this because it's vital. I'm not strong enough a character or big-headed enough even to think that I'm the only person who could do that. I need the business to come with me, and therefore having allies, having cheerleaders, having sponsors, all those are still vital, regardless of how senior you are, to drive some of that through. Particularly, it's a motive, isn't it? When you're spending an organization's money, it's an emotive subject. And sometimes it's quite substantial spends of money. You think of security tooling is not cheap. I think of even just my Microsoft licensing is not cheap. So you've got to really be able to articulate why that spend is important at that time.
Quite. And I guess segueing across to the security tooling, the industry. What are your thoughts on that as an observer? Obviously, that's part of your role, and I know you're about to bring somebody on board to take up that role and take that away from you, certainly to a certain degree. What's your perception of the security industry? People my side, supply side, as it were.
I often wonder about this. I think it's getting better. I think before there was always a sense that there might be some sort of commercial advantage of sharing too much or being too candid, too open. I mean, nobody wants to be in a security job, really. It's, they are thankless. They are the first person who's going to get hold of their calls if anything goes wrong. So that any security job is always going to be a challenge. It's probably always the point as well where people will think they don't need to spend the money because there's still, I believe, a general sense of it'll never happen to us. But I've started to see a change, and actually saw recently an invite to a security group it's almost a networking event for security practitioners, where it is about sharing a bit of knowledge, helping each other understand the threats. And you take where Buzzacott are located right now. We are We are in the city of London. We're just off Cheapside. I'm directly opposite one of the Magic Circle law firms. I think if ever there is a cyber event, the splash of that, if it tackles the people opposite me, the splash of that will impact my organization. So why wouldn't we talk and share knowledge? So I think it's getting better. It used to feel a bit cloak and dagger, and things like red hat, white hat balls and all that sort of stuff would always feel a bit like it was a bit cloak and dagger. I think it's becoming less like that now. But it still is full of very silver-bearded individuals. I will say that. I think we struggle a bit with diversity. Yeah. Great to see more really strong diverse characters coming into those roles, but it's sort of born out of that deep embedded IT security world that used to be just people who were very insular, and it is changing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Staying with supply side then, Mark, obviously I'm certainly keen to know, there's been a plethora of vendors, there's been lots of people offering solutions. How is that for you in your role, trying to make sense of that noise? Because if you look at endpoint, for example, there are hundreds of endpoint security solutions, not just one segment. And you've got lots of different segments. You've got DLP, you've got network security. Where do you start with that? How do you try and make sense of that as client?
Yeah, and it's really challenging trying to know who all the people are, Paul, right? And what they do and what each tool is. I think that the start point for me is to have some design principles about what you're trying to achieve. That then allows you to then say, okay, those design principles will feed a strategy and have a strategy. Okay, so what does that mean? And recognizing that some of these tools are going to be parts of the roadmap to your end solution or to your sort of desired state. But it is really challenging. So you tend to find a little bit of the relationships you build with those vendors will be key. I think certainly for me, becoming more astute commercially around having captured your requirements, finding those vendors that can support, and then determining one or two, and then determine which is the best solution to always contrast, compare. But it is really, really difficult because there's a lot of very, very good products available and a lot of really very good vendors. And so balancing risk versus cost versus output, what is it you really want to achieve, and where do I spend my money? I don't have a limitless pot, so I'm always alert to how much I actually invest in these and making sure that you get the very best value for money. But I think also recognizing that you might implement a solution, and if it's not right, it's going to take you 2 years before you're ready to ramp out to that contract and think about what's coming next. So nothing moves quickly, but it is really challenging because you've got, I think that's probably the hardest parts of my role, is staying current with all the advances in these different tools and seeing what's available and how, because the pace of development is incredible. And you see tools really adding, how quickly the market shifted with people adding AI into their tools to offer a better level of service happened so quickly in the security space. It was phenomenal. And so how do you find the best tool? I think you listen to what your peers are doing. You meet vendors like you and I. Our relationship all started over a meal in the Oriental Club, if I remember right. Correct. And so how do you it's about listening to your side of the story and what you're doing and what you're doing with other clients and seeing, does that play a part in what I'm looking to achieve? I think that's important.
Yeah, I think your point about moving fast, I think from my side, the industry's perhaps moved very quickly in some respects, and almost it's like another widget or something to add to the mix, when arguably the fundamentals, the base, or whatever you want to call it, still haven't been completely nailed, such that when you add these extra widgets in, you just create a bigger headache for yourself. And we've sat and thought a lot about that and where our messaging sits with that, recognizing that. But then it's the cost element, as you've said. What's my capability internally? Because if I buy this thing or these things, and then Fred or Eric or whoever goes off into the sunset, I've got to find somebody else with that same skill set.
Yeah.
And if they're very niche technology, that's going to be a challenge in and of itself because the cohort's limited. And then back to that full nature of IP, they've got to get up to speed and understand the business. So they could be the best technician, checkpoints, whatever you've got and recruit them for, but they've still got to get their heads around the business and get around and figure out what does that mean in context of your organization. And I think from my side, I think people don't recognize that enough. They just think, oh, I'm going to throw another widget on. And my sense is that yourself, your peers are starting to get a little tired of that because you don't have the time to keep pace. And the features aren't always that significant of an improvement to warrant that change. It's a nominal increase.
Yeah, especially if you think in my responsibility. So I'm very fortunate. I'm bringing a CISO on board soon. He joins me in June. Their focus will be security tooling. Right now, I'm responsible for all of it, and I'm responsible for all the tooling around enterprise content management and what our infrastructure strategy looks like. And so it is a challenge. You're absolutely right. I think the other bit as well, Paul, and sometimes this is forgotten, is certainly my experience is we work in budgetary years. So if right now I'm halfway through my financial year, and therefore any investment I want to make won't happen now until probably the new year, because I'll have to wait for that new financial year to roll through. That sort of then means I end up with a very congested program space where I'm trying to do lots of things because I've got the budget to do it in the new year and therefore pushing it through. So that in itself is a challenge about when you deploy these tools, at what point, how do you pay for them? How do you integrate it into your systems? How do you integrate it into your landscape, and making sure that you really are adding value and not just buying a tool for the sake of buying it?
Yeah. And I guess staying with the theme of cyber, what do you perceive as threats, challenges looking ahead, external threat actors, the general stuff you'd expect? People often say, I know with the more less experience, or the less experienced in my sector will try and say to people like yourself, well, what keeps you awake at night? Which, come on, but without being as amateur as saying that in those terms, what do you see going forward? I appreciate you might want to get into specifics given your sensitivity, but I'm genuinely curious. What do you think further along the line do I need to be cognizant of as I start to do this design for next year's budget and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. I still think for me, number one is around digital skills. And so giving people more and more access to tools that we perhaps don't understand fully, and knowing that they're going to have greater access to data and information, that's probably going to be, and it's not that, it's probably the human risk, the human cyber risk bit. And this is not just the malicious deliberate. This is the inadvertent non-malicious type stuff. I think it's that just generally anyway, digital skills, as we're seeing more and more, the gaps, we're already noticing the gaps and we don't seem to be addressing them. And we're going to get more and more productivity tools thrown into the mix. Just look at the Microsoft stack, the amount of new tools that are arriving. Teams was a great example. Teams, very powerful, really useful tool. How many people then use it to have their channels, to-do lists, planners, outlooks, filing of emails, all working nicely and seamlessly? Or actually, how many people use Teams just as an instant messaging tool? And so you then add into that the further complexity. So the complexity of the landscape is just growing and growing. We're asking more and more of our people. They're busy. They've got a lot going on. You throw in that, that little cyber, one little phishing email or a QR-ishing, whatever we're calling that now, smishing, whatever. That's where the risk lies. The focus, when we talk about this in my leadership team now, the focus is not about trying to stop anything happening. It's about how quickly we recover post an event. What does our resilience posture look like now? We all know, everybody says it, what is it? It's not when, it's not if, it's when. And it's, if you don't think you've had a cyber event, you've had a cyber event, just don't know. It's all those old adages, but actually, so, okay, how quickly do we recover, return to normal operation? What does that look like?
Absolutely. And probably should say that yesterday I was at an event with one of our partners that offers a recovery service, immutable backup. And they went through a role play around, it was a fictitious ransomware incident, I believe it was. And they walked through that process and they had like a load of role play and actors. And it's quite interesting. There's majority IT professionals there. There's a few people, few partners like ourselves. But as you work through that, essentially like a tabletop exercise almost as a bit of a role play, you start to realize what could, where you could go wrong. And they had dwell time in there 4 months and all sorts of other stuff. And the big thing was they just not got a backup they could rely on, because with 4 months in the organization, the attackers had completely trashed the backups. And it was a retail business in this thing. And I think thinking through the ramifications like that isn't something people have necessarily done. Some do, but I think a lot don't. And even the steps along the way, we talk about phishing. Somebody sells a phishing solution, great. It's not going to cure it. Then they'll have buy our endpoint solution. I'll not call out the vendors, but the leaders and all the rest. Buy that, you're golden. No, you're not, because thinking through the steps, what I want for us is just controlling the user's access. You lock that down, and that's just a pro services piece of work. It's not a widget, but just getting your head around that, massive mitigation there straight away.
Yeah.
But if all once fails, you've got to be able to recover, to your point.
That's right.
I think it will happen, and it's like scorched earth.
And how quickly can you recover? You look at the hotel chain in Vegas that 12 months still having issues with. And so that's a key part of our thinking now. It's really interesting. I also think our focus on training and awareness has switched a bit now. I've never been a fan of a phishing exercise to try and catch people. I don't like. I've never thought that really works. I'm more of a let's build a better security culture, and they make a mistake. They make this mistake because they're people. I had an email recently from a law enforcement agency in the UK from a young detective constable. And it looked like a phishing email, and that was and so I reported it, and that police force had to get in touch with us to say, look, sorry, we didn't mean it was just. And this young detective constable had not been taught how to write an email that didn't look like a stereotypical phishing email, and you think that's just and actually rather wonderfully, it's a couple of partners in the firm that had been sent to recognize that it was or saw it as a phishing email and reported it because they'd been trained how not to write a phishing email. And so, it's how we view these challenges as well. I think, Paul, that's important. I was maintained with all of my colleagues. I'm there to support them and help them work securely and to feel confident. But if they make a mistake, it's okay. Tell me, we'll fix it. Don't hide it away or whatever.
I think that point is something I've felt for quite some time. This notion, this concept, or this behaviour of kind of like, stupid users, call them out. You need to encourage that people to come forward. Mistakes will happen. You were saying earlier about all this bombardment of information. I've seen some quite incredible cases. The lady was at People's Media or something, and the employer took her to court because she succumbed to a phishing email. It's like that's not the answer, in my opinion.
Definitely not. If you start doing that, they'll end up not working there. They won't want to make any decisions, or they won't react to anything. It just slows everything down. It's we want to encourage that sort of positive security behavior. People take ownership, and of course that also means feeling comfortable that if they don't have to worry about admitting they've made a mistake. Tell me, we can make it better. Unless I would much rather find out and try and deal with it at the point of impact rather than trying to deal with the backwash of it much later on.
That's my guys. Bring me bad news early. I could deal.
Yeah. I'm not as intimidating as I look. Don't be fooled by this big husky exterior. I'm a nice guy. I want to help you.
There's the point where we let see stuff that you still got a collection of guns and weaponry or something.
Yeah, the army taught me how to fight with a bayonet. That's why I don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any thoughts for people then going forward? We've touched on quite a few things there. I thought the cheerleaders one for me was particularly useful and helpful. Any thoughts or comments as we look forward?
Yeah, I think for me, looking forward is recognizing we are living in a more and more complex, volatile, uncertain environment, and therefore that remaining agile, thinking with clarity, and being understanding are key. And so I think for any security leader or any technology leader, having a vision and that clarity and agility of thought will become more and more an important skill you have to nurture.
I certainly agree. And I suppose some final question. Is there anybody you think that might want to come and chat with us on this? Anybody who's passionate about the subject and you might want to recommend or set up, should we say?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. So I think there's some really Christian Toon, legal CISO at Prince of Masons, superstar. Someone like Ozza Lash at CyberSafe or any of his team, Liz Murray at CyberSafe, absolute superstars. A great view on sort of human risk. But there's lots of really good people. Another interesting character that I think you'd enjoy chatting to would be Mike Hill, the CDIO at the Cabinet Office. Another really good character. But I think that's the one thing that I quite like now in my role is running across sector. There's some superb talent out there that you could talk to and I love every opportunity to meet these guys and have chats about what's going on, what challenges they face. It can be quite lonely, these leadership roles, and therefore speaking to other leaders and sharing stories and knowledge is really key for me.
We talked about that, didn't we, when we first met up? It looks exciting, but it can be a little bit lonely at the top.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you're the name at the bottom of that policy that says we're going to keep the organisation secure, you know you're in trouble.
You're the big man. Well, look, Mark, thank you very, very much for giving me your time. I really appreciate that. It's been good to catch up. Look forward to checking back on the time capsule in
No doubt you will hold me to that, Paul. I know what you're like. You will definitely remember. But thank you for the invite.
The audience, well, I won't. It's out there now.
Yeah, that's right. But no, really, really delighted to be along, and hopefully there's something useful in there for other people as well. But thank you for inviting me. It's always great to catch up.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Mark. So thanks very much to Mark for agreeing to come along and do that. And to the listeners, the audience, stay tuned for the next one. There'll be more people like Mark sharing their thoughts, their insights around this. Don't forget to subscribe to us. It's ThreatCast on your preferred podcast platform. Thanks again.